Hi everyone. I'm going to talk about monster theory. To me, monster theory is a way of understanding why people are considered other or monstrous. Um, it's more of a tool to understand why they are thought of as different and treated as such. Um, the theory explores not only physical monstrosity but also internal or personality wise and cultural societal monstrosity as well. This is a relatively new theory, therefore, there aren't as many notable theorists or works associated with it. But there are three that I think are really beneficial. They are Monster Theory Reading Culture by Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, Powers of Horror, an Essay on Objection by Julia Kristeva. We'll go with that. And The Monstrous Feminine, Film, Feminism, and Psychoanalysis by Barbara Creed. Monster Theory Reading Culture by Cohen, it's a popular reference for monster theory. It's probably the first one you'll find when you search for just text about monster theory. It's a collection of essays and it addresses why famous fictional monsters are so famous and touches on aspects of like culture which paint or painted individuals in reality as monstrous. Um, Cohen writes in the preface, the monster is a problem for cultural studies, a code or a pattern or a presence or an absence that unsettles what has been constructed to be perceived as natural, as human. This is a good starting point for understanding the theory, as everything kind of branches out from this idea. That's why I wanted to start with this, because it's a good base text. Through the essays, students can get a good idea of the different aspects as it relates to like things like vampires or Frankenstein or conjoined twins, and it goes from there. Um, the second one I read and included in this presentation is Julia Kristeva's Powers of Horror. It's an essay on objection. This does not specifically talk of monster theory. This was done, I think, maybe 10 to 20 years before Cohen's monster theory book. While it doesn't outright refer to monster theory or monstrosity, it addresses many of the same points that Cohen has, but Kristeva instead calls it the abject. She states, what is abject, on the contrary, the jettisoned object, is radically excluded and draws me toward the place where meaning collapses. A certain ego that merged with its master, a superego, has flatly driven it away. It lies outside, beyond the set, and does not seem to agree to the latter's rules of the game. The abject is treated like an outsider or other or outlier, much like Cohen suggests. It's something that repulses the object or the eye, the objective view. And she continues with, and yet from its place of banishment, the abject does not cease challenging its master. Without a sign for him, it beseeches a discharge, a convulsion, a crying out. So through this, she explores not only why the abject are considered different, but also how it affects those who consider them. And then the last theorist and work that I want to talk about before exploring a passage is The Monstrous Feminine, Film, Feminism, and Psychoanalysis by Barbara Creed. It explores monster theory in women, specifically. Creed touches on femininity. Sorry, excuse me, I can't talk. Motherhood, vampires, witches, demonic possession, and wombs, along with Medusa and castration, or the fear of castration. Even though this is more related to film and horror and monsters, it was still very relatable to literature as well. I found it really easy to tie it to vampirism, as I said, it has a section specifically on that. So she writes that all human societies have a concept of the monstrous feminine, of what it is about woman that is shocking, terrifying, horrific, abject. By looking at the fictional monsters on screen, Creed lends understanding as like why such characteristics of femininity are so monstrous that they get exaggerated for the big screens or changed to fit horror. She also references Kristeva a lot, which is helpful to, as she explains Kristeva a little bit more, so it's helpful in understanding that as well. Before I end this presentation, I want to look at a passage from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. For my book, it's page 58, but if you don't have the same book, it is the beginning of chapter 5. This happens right when Victor is, right when his monster has been created. He says, "How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing. His teeth are of pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature." From this, you can see that Victor is thinking of the monster as something greatly other, even though he had crafted him from, human parts. That sounds horrible, but human parts. He can't see him as human or beautiful or anything other than ghastly, I would say, at this point. I think this ties well with another quote by Kristeva. She says that the corpse, or cadaver, cadare, to fall, that which has irredeemably become a cropper, is cesspool and death. It upsets even more violently the one who confronts it as fragile and fallacious chance. So after this quote, and through this quote as well, you can see that it's what pains Victor and causes an aversion for him to the monster is how it's, even though he made it alive, it's still dead. So it's undead, and that causes some uncomfortable feelings with it. He sees that he could be like this through his death, because if someone were to reanimate him, he would be the same, because even though the monster was human, and still technically is, it doesn't have human qualities to it anymore. I think that's all, friends. I hope this is helpful.